Alright guys, so I want to talk a little bit more about how to actually accomplish what we've been talking about already with our upcoming Cubist picture, okay? So here's what we have at our disposal right now. You guys have just gone through and you've printed out your image. Some of them are a full page, right? So it goes pretty much edge to edge. Any piece of paper that you have, a printer-sized paper, is going to be 8.5 by 11 inches. Okay, so the short side's 8.5 inches, the long side's 11. Simple enough. If your page goes, or if your picture goes to the edges of that page, or if there's a tiny little border, then you can just use the ruler and just use straight edges, or straight inches. So you would take your ruler, you'd line it up like so, and you just go 1 inch, make a mark, 1 inch, make a mark, so on and so forth, until you go to 8.5 by 11. Now, because there's this half, you are going to have a little bit of excess space, okay? So just assume that you're going to do 8 squares on the top and 11 squares going down. You're going to have this little bit of an edge, and you can either disregard it or you can actually cut it off if you want to. That's fine as well, okay? Now, this is what I wanted to focus on. This is why I wanted to record, and so that you guys could follow along in case it's a little tricky. There's a little bit of math. If you have an image where you can see more of a border, right? Maybe it's a little bit smaller. Maybe there's a border on one side, not the other, okay? For the sake of simplicity, whenever we expand our pictures, I'm going to have it go where I still want, no matter how big your image is, I still want you to have 8.5 by 11, or 8 by 11, okay? So, we should have 8 squares on the top and 11 squares on the side, okay? So, that being said, we have to figure out how wide to make these squares. So they probably will not be perfectly square. They might actually end up being more long, rectangular. Maybe they'll be taller, right? That's okay. That's okay. If your image is a little bit off, we want to be able to cut this up to 8 by 11. The reason for that is whenever we go back to our secondary sheet of paper to kind of blow it up and abstract it, we're going to be able to utilize these numbers elsewhere. Okay? So it'll pay off. It's a little bit of a pain now, but it's easier later. What you're going to do, simply put, is you're going to measure your image with a ruler, just a normal, regular old ruler. So let's say that I measure this and it's 10 inches by 7 inches, right? So it's a little bit off. It's close to the full page, but it's not quite there. I then would divide by 8 and by 11 because I want to be able to figure out how many inches is my square when I divide this space up into 11 pieces or into 8 pieces, right? You're going to get a number, I don't remember exactly, you're going to get a number that's similar to maybe 0.87654321. We're just going to round. So again, if it's a little bit off, it's not the end of the world, right? Again, we kind of talked about over here. You're going to have a little bit of excess either way. That's all right. So we're just going to round. We'll get rid of this extra stuff and we'll just say 0.8. So you're going to have 0.8 of an inch. Right? Now we know enough about the ruler that, let's say this is our ruler, here's 2, here's 1 inch. We divide it in half, that's half an inch, right? Pretty easy, not rocket science yet. If you divide that, oops, that's 1/4 of an inch, a fourth. If you divide it again, that's 1/8 of an inch. It always goes down half and half and half. So if we're doing 0.8 of an inch, that means you would have right here. You'd have 1/8 minus from your whole inch. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? It's not super rocket science, but it's definitely enough that you have to think it through. Now, what happens if you get a number that's like, maybe it's 0.9 or 0.7? What happens if you get 0.7? Well, there's not a 1/7 of an inch without getting some micrometer out, right? So we're just going to round. Again, we're talking millimeters here. I don't really care. So you can either bump it up to 1/8 if you have a 0.7 or something like that. You can bump it down and go for the next one down. That's fine too, okay? But when everything's said and done, you're going to have your image with 8 on top, 11 on the side, okay? You're then going to put a grid across it. For your grid, on this one, you're the one with your photo, okay? I want you to use a T-square. In case you didn't know, this is a T-square, okay? And the way that you use it is you're going to line it up with the edge of your table. So think about it this way. If you have a table, lock it in, right? That way whenever you slide it along, it stays perfectly at a right angle. So you're going to go down and you'll do this, like so, and you will completely grid off your picture, okay? You get the idea. So it'll be a grid all over, right? Perfectly even, everybody's happy. Then you're going to bounce over to a new sheet of paper. Now again, remember that this was just going to be a contour drawing. This is not the one we're painting on. So you have your photograph that's all gridded off, and then you're going to go back and you're going to make all these kind of disjointed lines, right? They're all going to be different angles. You can do literally whatever the heck you want with this, with two caveats. A, you need to have the same starting spaces. So if you have 8 on top, you have to have 8 starting spaces here. 11 on the side, with 11 dots on the here, okay? Then from there, I would suggest not using a T-square. I'd suggest using just a plain old ruler and just start going crazy with it, right? So I do an angle like that, something like that.
Can I overlap?
They cannot. That's rule number 2. That's rule number 2. So these sides have to equal each other and they cannot overlap. The reason for that is that you're going to go back through. So let's say, just for the sake of argument, that that's my grid. Then just like you're playing Battleship or something, right? So I have 1, 1. That's this one. That's that. So there's nothing there. I don't have to worry about drawing. I'm just going to go literally square by square. Now eventually you're going to get to a point where your squares aren't going to line up. They're not going to look good, right? And that's okay. Because what's going to end up happening, I'll get rid of this real quick. What's going to end up happening, let's say we could zoom in. And let's say that one of your squares, your perfect right angle squares, looks like this, right? It's the top of your hair or something, I don't know. So let's say it looks like that. If you were to pop it out, there you have it, right? But you're going to get maybe a square over on this page that's more like that. Or maybe it's really wide and obtuse. Maybe it's really teeny tiny, like that, right? You're going to get weird shapes. It's your job as the artist to take this image and in your mind and stretch it, pull it, and bend it around so that it fits this shape. So if I was going to make this wider, well, okay, let's see. I go like this, like that. Right? If I was going to make it skinnier, pull these 2 edges down. All right, so all of a sudden I'm trying to fit the same object in the same space. Okay? Get the idea? You're going to do that for everything. Okay? You're going to work on it today. You're going to start it today. We have time. And then we'll probably wrap them up tomorrow. We'll use this finished, just kind of contour outline drawing of your painting, all abstracted, all cubist, right? We're going to use that to create our monochromed painting. Again, it's not going to be huge, and you'll have until the end of the week to do that. Okay? Questions, comments, concerns, issues, subscriptions? Nothing? Good? Go? Okay. That's it.
As you begin to work on gridding off your drawing from your photograph, you will find that it's relatively simple. As you get to converting it into the broken graph, it'll be much more difficult. Remember to keep all of the information from one square to another, this way making sure that the image is transferred properly. As you mix your paint, remember to use black and white as a base, adding your primary or secondary color to each. Try to keep the same amount of primary or secondary color to each and different amounts of black and white. In this way, you should have a relatively easy time mixing up your paints.